Now, anything I do in the theater, one of the thoughts that I sort of tick through is, how could puppets be part of this? And sometimes the answer is they can't. But my desire is always to find them because, and this is beyond any intellectual thing, it really is just unbelievably seductive. They working with them and interacting with not just the puppets, but the puppeteers is such an exciting process and such a, to me, what feels like a boundaryless process where you never know exactly what's going to happen, that I love to do that. And let me just say one more point, and then I'll sit down and perhaps the actual puppeteers who know something about the subject can speak. The two biggest uses of puppets I've had is working with Paula Vogel on Long Christmas Ride Home and working with Rinne on Compulsion. And in both of those cases, the playwright began, at a certain point the playwright wrote the puppetry in to the script. And in both cases there's actually a similarity that I think is worth noting, is that in Long Christmas Ride Home there's several uses of puppets, but the core use is for Bunraku-style puppets playing the children of an incredibly unhappy marriage that we see play out in terrible slow motion over the course of a Christmas day. And in the case of Compulsion, again, several uses of puppets, but the primary use of puppet is to play Anne Frank on stage. And what you have in both of those cases is puppets representing on stage something that would be offensive to the point of not being able of de-aestheticizing the experience. If you had actual children on stage experiencing the horrors of that particular kind of marriage disintegrating, or I mean, I know that because Rinne is an artist, she doesn't talk about these things quite so bluntly as I do, but there is something just sort of terribly repulsive about the idea of anybody pretending to be Anne Frank in a play that is about people using and abusing the memory of this actual living artist and woman who was murdered. And so in both cases, by putting puppets there, it's an act of respect and honoring at the same time as it's transgressive. It's honoring the fact that you're not actually going to inflict real children and real children's emotions onto these horrible, traumatic experiences. And in the case of Compulsion, it's honoring the fact that we're not going to pretend that we actually speak for Anne Frank. We're going to actually acknowledge there is a uncrossable distance between that little girl who was killed and us. And yet, we're crossing it. So that we're both putting kids in transgressive situations, but we're honoring the fact that we're not putting kids in transgressive situations. We're going to honor the fact that we're not going to pretend to be Anne Frank, and yet we're actually going to portray Anne Frank on stage and put words in her mouth that she never had. And that to me, I'm sure there are smart things to say about this that I'm not saying, but I promise you that is part of the theatrical and dramatic pleasure, that tension happening in front of us that feels deep and powerful. And finally, the obvious thing that everybody who works with puppets knows, that they are marvelous transference screens, is that the fact that they are not actually human beings allows you as an audience member to just pour emotionality and transference and anthropomorphize them in ways that is, again, it's intoxicating and liberating.